and welcome to the hot seat on Full Sail Live. I'm Josh Taylor, and joining me today to share some insights on his career in broadcasting down in South Florida with the beIN Sports Network is beIN Sports broadcaster and Inter Miami CF play-by-play commentator Andres Cordero. Andres, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Cheers. Thanks so much for the invite, and I'm happy to chat.
Andres, you've been with beIN Sports for 8 years. So what did you do professionally before you joined beIN Sports?
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how long I've been there, so it's a little bit wild that it's almost been a decade now since the channel launched. I got there very early on. It's been a fun ride. So before beIN Sports, I was working in a similar capacity at Gold TV, which I begun there around 2004-ish. So it was a time period when all of a sudden you can see an explosion of soccer broadcasting across the United States, whereas in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was really tough to get games on. Gold TV, this channel sort of owned by a Uruguayan company, started showing, Serie A games, La Liga games. And I think a lot of the American soccer fans started to see a version of soccer that they couldn't on a regular basis outside of, some occasional Champions League games or whatnot. And so that was a fun way to start, to cover both European and South American soccer for a bit of a niche channel, but a niche channel that had really loyal, really passionate viewers. People really cared about the stuff that we were covering. So I was there for almost about a decade, almost about around as long as I've been at beIN Sports now. And when beIN Sports launched, they took La Liga with them. La Liga was my bread and butter. It was the league I knew the best, the league I followed closest. So it was just sort of a natural progression for me to follow Real Madrid, Barcelona, and company over to beIN Sports.
You followed a lot of international soccer at Gold TV, so you brought that experience to beIN Sports. So what were some of your roles when you first started at beIN Sports?
So my very first assignment at beIN actually was the Handball World Cup. And I think in this business, you have to be very adaptable, right? Because you don't know what you're going to like and what you're not going to like. And I ended up falling in love with handball, having covered that tournament, which was held in Spain, I believe 2013, around there, 2012. And not knowing much about the game, it was just sort of a crash course in how do I present this in a way that doesn't come across as, fake or vague. You're learning like a whole new universe of terminology. And so that was a really interesting way to start my beIN Sports career, because obviously I go over following La Liga, expecting to do a ton of soccer work. But at first I was doing, a bit of tennis, world sports, track and field, motorbikes. We had World Superbike, which was a lot of fun to cover. And it really challenged me. It made me step outside of my comfort zone, work on things that weren't my bread and butter, as La Liga had been, as soccer had been. So I thought that actually helped me grow tremendously. And then very shortly thereafter, I started working in studio for beIN Sports. And one of the reasons I say to stay adaptable is I didn't ever really set out to become a play-by-play commentator. It's not sort of where my journey began. I thought I wanted to be a writer, and then I thought I wanted to be in studio as an analyst. And I think if you keep your options open, you sort of surprise yourself with what sort of arouses your passion, right? And so play-by-play for me was the thing that after I did my first game, it was such a rush that I knew I was dead set on doing that. And so I'm currently on my own journey to try and become the best American voice in play-by-play in the U.S.
Andres, how did you get involved with soccer?
So I fell in love with the game pretty early on, and I knew I wanted to work in sports. I saw an area where the game was growing tremendously, where I could work on something that I genuinely loved, and saw an audience there that was sort of growing right before our eyes in my time at Gold TV. And as you see the country sort of start to fall in love with the game, and younger players, younger and younger kids, wearing PSG jerseys and Real Madrid jerseys and Chelsea jerseys, which, weren't really a thing as much in the 90s, I thought that was an area that I should explore, that I could, that I could succeed in, because I could throw myself fully behind it. And I have now for the better part of 15 years.
Andres, you mentioned earlier that your focus right now is trying to be the best American play-by-play commentator. But one person I know that you mentioned on previous shows that's been an inspiration for you is Ray Hudson. So how has Ray Hudson made an impact on your career?
So Ray's actually been really close my entire career because when I began this thing at Gold TV, Ray and Phil Shane was a play-by-play commentator, still is, and is one of my mentors, one of the best in the business. Phil Shane and Ray Hudson were the two main commentators for Gold TV at the time, and so I feel like I learned a ton from both of them. And it's actually quite special for me now with Inter Miami to be working on the broadcast team with Ray. I'll be doing play-by-play, he'll be doing color commentary. I think he is, in his own words, a verbal gymnast, someone who not only sees the game differently, I think, from a lot of other people, but also can express it in ways that I don't think anyone else can. And so I don't think you can sort of replicate the final product of Ray Hudson, right? So I'm saying I learned a lot from him. You can't be Ray Hudson. You can't come up with the sort of metaphors and the excitement that comes so natural to him, but you can sort of see what it is that influences his view of the game. What are the things that he likes? And so I think when I first started listening to Ray, I was blown away by the fact that he was seeing things that I wouldn't even know where to look, right? And so that's one of the beautiful things about football is we're all watching the same 90 minutes, but we're not all watching the same game. And I needed to understand how it was that Ray saw the game as a former player, as a former coach. And I've dedicated a lot of time to that. And so to work with him side by side now in Inter Miami is really special, and I continue to learn from him.
Andres, what was the biggest thing you would say you learned from Ray Hudson?
That the game is fun. That at the end of the day, this is an entertainment business, and that the game is art, right? And so I think in this country in particular, people are coming around, but we see almost all sports as almost exclusively athleticism. And I think, yes, there's an athletic element to soccer, but really it's the artistic element that makes soccer really, really special. There's an aesthetic to the game that I think is absolutely beautiful, that translates really nicely between the youth level, the men's level, and the women's level. I mean, you can watch soccer at virtually any level, and if you have two good teams going head to head, it's going to be a wildly entertaining game. So I think from Ray, I learned not to take the game so seriously. People are, myself included, obsessed with tactics, obsessed with statistics. But at the end of the day, it's the passion that really gets through. And I think that's what Ray does so phenomenally well.
I'm Josh Taylor, and this is the Hot Seat on Full Sail Live. And if you missed anything, joining us right now is beIN Sports broadcaster and Inter Miami CF play-by-play commentator, Andres Cordero. Andres, how do you develop chemistry with your broadcast team? You mentioned Ray Hudson. How is it working with other people?
So it's reps, really. It's the repetitions, and there's no substitute for it. I mean, obviously, a lot of variables in play, just like when you're meeting anybody to work with anybody, whether or not you click. But I think through this repetition of games, and we at beIN Sports cover a lot of soccer, right? We've got La Liga, Liga on the Turkish Super League, the Copa Libertadores, the Copa Sudamericana, World Cup qualifiers. I could go on and on because it's a lot of properties. And so a lot of properties require a lot of repetitions for the broadcasters. And I think just we're a relatively small broadcast team, but we've got a lot of mileage on our vocal cords. And I think just naturally over the years, those relationships develop, that chemistry develops. I think it's important to sort of listen for what it is that gets a rise out of your co-commentators because you always want to put them in the best position to succeed. I think especially as a play-by-play commentator, for me, I feel like a curator of the game. I almost don't want to be noticed too much, which I think is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but I do want to put my specialist, my analyst, my color commentator in the best positions to shine. So if people are talking about Ray's analysis or any of my co-commentators as a result of me either framing it a certain way or putting a light on it, I feel like I've done my job.
And just to follow up on that, Andres, how did the opportunity doing play-by-play with Inter Miami?
So that's actually kind of interesting because I was in the process of buying season tickets for Inter Miami when I got the call. When they said they wanted to meet, that they were interested, that they knew my work. And it's really special to me actually because I'm raised in Miami. Football is my life's work and my passion. And so I knew that I really wanted to be involved with that team in some capacity, and that the team was going to be a part of my life in some capacity. Hence, I was in the process of buying season tickets. When I got the interview, I knew that I had the right sort of profile, the right background, that we would vibe, I think, the team and I, and it was exactly as I expected. Meeting people at the club felt more like reuniting with old friends and meeting people for the first time. There's this great like family atmosphere about the team and about the project. And I think a lot of that has been born out of just the adverse conditions of the team being founded, right? We're about to have our first home game this coming Saturday, and it's a home game some like 6 years in the making. And so I think everyone pulling in the same direction was something that made it really attractive to me. So yeah, when given the opportunity, I absolutely jumped on it. This is probably one of the proudest moments in my career, just because of what the club itself was always going to mean to me and to my two small kids.
Well, Andres, thanks again for taking the time to share us some insights on how you got started in your career and how you're looking forward to your opportunity to enter Miami CF down in South Florida.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation.
And stay tuned, guys, because coming up next, we'll have part 2 of our interview. We'll focus more with Andres on Inter Miami, what his expectations are for them this upcoming season and down the road in the future. So stay tuned. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hot Seat on Full Sail Live. I'm Josh Taylor, and join me once again to share his insights on Inter Miami CF season is play-by-play commentator Andres Cordero. Andres, thanks for joining me on the show again today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks a lot for the talk. I love talking about football. I like talking about myself less than I like talking about football, so I'm happy for the second part as well.
Andres, this is your first season, of course, covering Inter Miami in their inaugural season. Of course, with the situation with COVID-19, it's been anything but normal with everything going on right now. So I just want to know from your experience, what has that process been like for you covering the team so far?
So it's been at more of a distance than I would have expected pre-pandemic. One of the exciting things about taking the job was that proximity to the club, was being able to see sort of the day-to-days, to get to know the personalities behind the scenes, to get to know the personalities that are going to be on the pitch that we're going to be commentating about. And so just this, the circumstances that we've dealt with nationwide and worldwide have made that proximity close to impossible. But I've sort of grown through my career covering games and happenings that are going on, halfway across the world. So that from that standpoint, it wasn't a challenge that I couldn't meet. But it has been really interesting to see how this has come together, how the stadium that they've built, the facilities they've built are just top of the line, state of the art, how there are plans for it to expand even further. And so this does feel very much like, whether it's the construction of the squad currently, the team itself, the venue, everything seems to be sort of a work in progress that's headed in a really positive direction. And that had some hurdles to climb over the last 6 years when it came to location, when it came to launching this team. It's here now. I think there's an excitement about it in the city. And I think we're all looking forward to the very first home game, which, again, 6 years in the making, finally a game on your home pitch.
And I'm very excited to watch the game as well. Of course, you'll be playing your rivals, Orlando City SC. But, Andres, you've lived in South Florida for almost 30 years. And how has the soccer scene changed from the time since you've lived there?
So I think soccer is just a constant part of the city. Whether there's been a pro MLS club or not, you can't go to a park in Miami and not find a pickup game. You've got five-a-side games and five-a-side pitches that are sprouted literally all over the city. And in some cases, almost an oversaturation of it, right? And so I think the culture of soccer is really, really strong in South Florida, as you would expect, with the Latin population, some European population, tons of Brazilians in the city. And so I think that's just been that steady, that constant interest in the game. Then there's a sort of professional aspect of it, right? Which the Miami Fusion were here contracted a season in which they were the best team in the league, having won the Supporters Shield with Ray Hudson as their manager. And then, a long drought of really top flight professional soccer as far as U.S. soccer is concerned, with, some exceptions, teams playing in the NASL, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers coming back to playing the sort of new NASL, Miami FC launching, days of Zinho and whatnot. So the scene has been here. I think it needed a top flight club, a return to Major League Soccer in order to just bring all of it together in one place. And I think that's what Inter Miami is for this community.
You kind of alluded, Andres, on how the struggle has been with other clubs trying to get it. But as you mentioned, Pro Team coming in to kind of unite that fan base, especially with South Florida, with Fort Lauderdale and Miami. So we know for Inter Miami, that process was very long. But from you working with the team now and being in South Florida, so long, what was that process covering Inter Miami, landing a team, and taking like 4, 5, 6 years before we got kicked off in 2020?
Yeah, so I actually wasn't involved in any of that process. So from that standpoint, I was watching it and living it as any other South Florida soccer fan, with the exception that my day job was at another soccer channel covering games that for the most part had nothing to do with MLS or Inter Miami. So in reality, I can't speak to the challenges that the club have gone through with any great depth, because I didn't really live it. And the fact that we've been forced into this distancing for obvious and justifiable reasons has made it so that we're all a little bit compartmentalized in terms of how we're working. And so for me, I've been working on the broadcast side of things. I've been working on getting to know the team. I've been working on getting to know the manager. I'm much more interested, and always have been, in the game itself and the sport itself than all the stuff surrounding it, which I get that the stuff surrounding it is what sells it, what people are interested in, what they talk about around the water cooler. But for me, it really is the soccer that's the most important thing. And so what I've been focused on the most is trying to learn what this club is, what this team is, how these players are working together, and what the coach Diego Alonso's vision for it is. And I've mostly dedicated my time to that, the soccer side of things.
Andres, what was the biggest thing you've learned working with the club so far?
The biggest thing I've learned is it's a new atmosphere for me. It's a new, because I've been working for networks my entire career, to work with an organization, to work directly with a club. It's a little bit of a different look at the game. It's a bit more promotional at times than what I've been doing in the past, because in this occasion, I'm almost an employee of the club itself, as opposed to someone who's covering the entirety of the league. And so, I've just been going through how I will sort of approach that in a 90-minute broadcast versus how I might call a game, for example, between Paris Saint-Germain and Olympique Lyon for an audience that is mostly Ligue 1, right? And so I think what I've learned is that I'm in the process of learning, I think, is the thing I've learned most.
I'm Josh Taylor, and this is the Hot Seat on Full Sail Live. And if you missed anything, joining me right now is beIN Sports broadcaster and Inter Miami CF play-by-play commentator, Andres Cordero. Andres, how will Inter Miami make soccer successful this time around?
So I think soccer is successful. You watch in South Florida, whenever a Colombian national team, El Salvador, Brazil come to play, the stadium gets packed. People have a fervor for it. As I said, with Miami Fusion, the original MLS, or the first MLS club in South Florida, you had a situation where, sporting wise, like as I said, the year they contracted, they were Supporters Shield winners. They were, arguably the best football in the league. It's a very different sort of business climate for soccer now than it was at the time when the league contracted. I don't want to get too much into the Fusion years, but I see the passion around the city. I see the ownership group that Inter Miami have, with obviously David Beckham being the most recognizable name, but the Mas brothers, Marcelo Claudia, people who are, seriously invested in soccer in this community and in this community as a whole. So I look at the ownership group. I look at the people who they've picked to build a sporting project. People like Paul McDonough, who's in charge of the soccer operations. people like Diego Alonso, given what he's done in Mexican soccer and in his years as a player. And I think, how could they not succeed? They've put together a lot of quality people who have a serious project with a long-term vision going forward, and everything's lined up quite nicely, I think.
We know Inter Miami, their supporters group, very loyal base. The biggest one we always hear about here in Orlando is the Southern Legion. So, Andres, how has Inter Miami connected with the community down in South Florida?
Yeah, as you mentioned, these supporters groups have been around longer than the club itself, right? And so that's when I speak about the constant sort of soccer culture that we've had down here, and the real hunger for a top flight club. I think those supporter clubs are the best example of it. I mean, they were there with incredible passion on day one. They've seen the players off in these like sort of spectacular shows on the way to the LAFC inaugural match in LA. Many of them traveled to LA. So I've actually been, I wouldn't say pleasantly surprised, because I know I'm from here. I'm a local kid. I know what the passion for the game is here. But it has been really nice to finally see it materialize, to finally see, the pink smoke in the air, and this sort of ravenous support for a team that, quite frankly, hasn't played many games so far, right? They're 5 games into their MLS history and are about to play their first ever home game. And yet you do feel this genuine passion that, doesn't feel plastic. It's not fabricated. It's here to stay.
That's right, Andres. And MLS, a lot of the clubs, I mean, I know about it here first with Orlando, and you've seen obviously in Miami with the fans being passionate with their clubs, and MLS has highlighted that with a lot of their clubs that we've seen, like Atlanta United, Seattle Sounders, LAFC, just to name a few. And those clubs have been very successful. Not us, but the other clubs, Atlanta, Seattle.
Well, things are looking up.
LAFC. Well, after I run with the MLS's back tournament, things are looking up with Oscar Pereira. He's definitely turned the culture around for our club. So we'll see how things turn in the second half of the season. Now all these MLS clubs are returning to their home markets. Andres, I know this is the first year for Inter Miami CF, but we always hear about Miami, glitz, glamour town. They like big stars. So how long do you think it will take for David Beckham, Jorge Mas, and this group to build a championship team in Miami?
So one of the really great things about Major League Soccer is, because of the system, because it is different from European soccer, because you do have playoffs, because you do have a large majority of or a big number of teams making those playoffs. I think you get a bit more parity. You get more sort of variety in the champions and who can win it. So it's not the same as asking, like, how do you build a team to win Ligue 1, as Paris Saint-Germain did with essentially constructing one of the richest squads, if not the richest squad ever assembled, with only Manchester City coming close. You're not asking how to win La Liga, where you have to outlast Real Madrid and Barcelona over a 38-game schedule. In Major League Soccer, if you can get in the playoffs, you can give yourself a really good chance to win. And so I actually think it's very much within the reach of the club to build a championship team and at least a contender. And as we talked about in terms of it being a work in progress, right? So we're 5 games into the season, and 2 players who could be absolutely key components for Inter Miami this season have yet to debut. Blaise Matuidi, World Cup winner, was their most recent signing. More on that in a moment. And Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez, who was a former Atlanta United center back, in my opinion, one of the more exciting center backs in the league. He wasn't allowed to play in the MLS's back tournament because he was a TAM signing, bit of an arbitrary rule. You sort of shrug and move on. Both of those guys could be they could be part of the spine of this Inter Miami team, right? When you're talking about very high quality center back, and Blaise Matuidi, one of the highest quality players in the league. And the fact that they did not use their last designated player spot, we're not going to get into the intricacies of MLS salary caps, but because they still have the ability to sign one more superstar player or one more big money signing, I think you still see a team that can get significantly stronger during the course of this season.
And I was just going to comment, Andres, on that thought about Blaise Matuidi coming in to Inter Miami, how big of that impact that will be, especially when the club is off to a slow start, 0-5, but it is an expansion team. Everyone knows expansion teams takes a while. And, of course, I think that was smart also that they got him on a TAM contract and not DP money. So like you mentioned, you still have that one DP spot that Miami will use to try to get a big name player. Now we've heard some Ezra Cavani lean on Messi recently, but I think he's going to stay at least for now. At least for now. But it's going to be really interesting to see who is that third player that Miami will be looking for. But as we focus on the current team right now, all the players that are there, how do you think Diego Alonso is – it's going to take time, but how do you think he's making an impact on the club to change the culture, considering that he was in Monterrey and winning championships down in Liga MX?
Yeah, so it's a strange situation probably because, as you mentioned, it's an expansion club, so it's not as if there's a history there or a culture to change, but rather all of it is sort of being built organically at the moment. And Diego Alonso arrived when most of the squad, at least the squad as it is today, was already built. And so it wasn't as if the coach was having a say in what the ingredients were to the dish that he was going to cook, but rather had to come and sort of integrate himself. And in that sense, I think Diego Alonso was a very good option for Inter Miami because he is a pragmatist, not in the sense that his football is necessarily conservative, but a pragmatist in the sense that he can look at the pieces that the team have on a roster and sort of build whatever the best, with input from the players, build whatever the best system will be for those guys, as opposed to sort of an ideologue who wants to come in playing a particular brand, a particular style of football, and wants to sometimes either force, round pegs into square holes, or can sort of complain that he doesn't have the pieces in place to play his football. So I think from that standpoint, Diego Alonso has been a terrific hire for this team. Despite the slow start, the team has been very, very competitive. All of the losses by a single goal. And there have been moments where I thought they deserved a lot more. I think of that second game against DC United, where they were the better team. Even I think at moments when they went down a man, that was probably the best performance I've seen from them so far. I think they've been hard done by in a couple of other instances. The inaugural game against LAFC, one of the best teams in the league, it took a wonder goal by Carlos Vela in order for LAFC to come away from that with a 1-0 win. So I think what you're seeing in Inter Miami is a really competitive team, a serious project under Diego Alonso. But after a while, you run out of patience with moral victories and want to pick up actual victories. I think there is a sense of patience, but also an urgency to try and deliver some joy to fans who have been incredibly passionate, incredibly supportive, and again, looking forward to the very first home game. So you take all of that with a grain of salt, considering 0-5, but not at home.
Andres, what do you expect for this team as we begin the second half of MLS return to play on the field?
That's really interesting because I don't know how much any of us really know, right? I mentioned key components, key pieces coming in. I expect improvements because Blaise Matuidi is a really high quality impact player who also fills a need for this team. For a while, they've been looking for a number 8. Well, they fill that position now with really top talent. Despite his age, Blaise Matuidi has a ton of energy, covers a ton of ground, decent passer of the ball. And I think in this league, his quality is really going to shine. Leandro Gonzalez-Pirez gives him another option to play the ball out of the back. And so I think you could see a team that's maybe a little more fluid playing out through its center backs. So I expect them to continue to be as competitive as they have been, but there obviously will be some difference to the way they look because they've added quality pieces to a team that I think was already highly competitive.
All right, Andres, let's focus on the game on Saturday. Inter Miami CF taking on Orlando City SC. What does Inter Miami need to do to get their first win of the season against the Lions?
I mean, it's going to sound overly simple, but sometimes it's a simple game. Just sort of put your chances away. It's a team that, without Robbie Robinson during the MLS's back tournament because of personal reasons, with Julian Carranza coming off of an injury and just getting his first MLS minutes, really had just the one center forward in Agudelo who they can count on. And so there were some chances to put away. He put away some of them. I think based on the level of competition that they've shown, and obviously Orlando showed that they're going to be very, very tough to beat. I have a ton of respect for the coach, Oscar Pareja. Told me a wonderful story a few years back. Actually, I interviewed him pretty early on in my career. And I was talking about sort of the accelerated growth, the way that players are developing faster than they used to. And he told me a story that in his town, when an avocado is not quite ripe enough, you wrap it in newspaper and you put it in the fridge. And then you take it out and it's actually ripened much, much quicker, but it doesn't taste the same. And I thought that was such an interesting way of communicating sort of, player development and whether these players are being rushed through or whatnot. So I think as a storyteller, as a communicator, I have a lot of respect for Oscar Pareja. Well, obviously he was a good player and a very good coach. And so I expect a really tough game between two teams that I kind of take exception to the idea that they're rivals yet, because up until a couple weeks ago, they've never played a game. But I think that rivalry will sort of develop by itself without us having to sort of force it, right, to fan the flames. And so I think this is going to be a game where both teams will have a big point to prove, and one in which Inter Miami, given the pieces they've added, should look a lot better than they have in the past.
I definitely agree with you on that one, Andres. And I think for the fans, I was reading on Twitter, I think they're still trying to come up with a rivalry name for this rivalry.
Yeah.
That the fact that it's still new, like you mentioned, we didn't play each other until the MLS is back tournament, and that was a very close game. Juan Agudelo, as you mentioned, gave us everything they could handle in that game. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. Maybe the pink and purple derby might work, but I don't know.
Something will happen organically, I'm sure of it. And the fans they'll never disappoint when it comes to that stuff.
I know it won't be El Trafico. We know that for sure. That's been taken.
Right.
But the War on I-4, that's taken as well. So they'll come up with something clever, I'm sure.
No doubt.
All right, Andres, before I let you go, I have a bonus question for you. The UEFA Champions League is this Sunday, and we got Bayern Munich taking on Paris Saint-Germain. So who you got?
Going into this, I thought Bayern were probably the strongest team in the Champions League. Just their energy is incredible. They're balanced on every line. They've had a remarkable turnaround during the course of the season. You've got two teams that are both going to try and win a treble. In PSG's case, a quadruple, because they've won all of the domestic competitions in France. But I think that the mental block that I thought a lot of the PSG players were experiencing by some of those disappointments they've had in the Champions League in years past was just lifted this season. And right now, I think the main difference is they hadn't had Neymar in those previous opportunities, right? Neymar was injured the last two times that Paris were knocked out of the Champions League. I think we've seen what a big difference he's made. Mbappe coming back from an ankle injury at just the right moment. If you asked me about it after Bayern beat Barcelona 8-2, I would have said nobody could touch that Bayern team, but they looked much more susceptible in their second game. And I do think Paris currently is probably the best team in Europe. So I would go with Paris Saint-Germain.
It'll be definitely an interesting game on Sunday. I can't wait to watch. And I did watch the Bayern-Lyon game yesterday. Lyon, they had those two chances early in the game. They just would have put them in. I think it would have been a different game between them and Bayern. And PSG, they got over the hurdle against Atalanta. That game was crazy.
Right. Yeah. Atalanta's entire season.
You gotta give Atalanta credit. They hang in there, and of course PSG looked themselves against RB Leipzig. So it's going to be a definitely interesting battle. But if PSG somehow wins the Champions League, I'm gonna laugh because I'm like, see, PSG spent money and they bought a championship, but Man City, they've been doing this for years and they can't get past the quarterfinals.
I think we draw too many declarative statements from the Champions League, and I get it. It's the biggest level of soccer anywhere on the planet. It's bigger than the World Cup in terms of the quality of play, even though the World Cup it means more emotionally to a lot of people. So I think the absolute highest level of play is the Champions League, but you don't decide it the way you decide your leagues, which is over a 38-game season, right? And so it is much more about getting the right breaks at the right moment, being healthy at the right time. I think Neymar is a really good example of that. The difference between PSG advancing and PSG being knocked out is the availability of the world's most expensive signing, right? And over these short tournaments, we have a tendency to say that, well, if somebody hasn't won it, they can't win it until they do, right? And so I wouldn't rule City out of winning a Champions League in the near future just because they haven't been able to up until now.
Well, for PSG, I certainly think the rest, all this time off, definitely helped out a bit with only playing two Coupe de Ligue games and then, of course, the friendly before the return of the Champions League. I think that's helped them out as well. For everybody else, they played a bunch of games. So we'll see how that plays out. But Andres Cordero, again, I just wanted to thank you for taking time to share with us your insights on your career and a preview on Inter Miami CF's impact in South Florida, as well as their upcoming match this Saturday against Orlando City SC.
My pleasure, Josh. Good talking to you.
And that was Andres Cordero, beIN Sports broadcaster and play-by-play commentator for Inter Miami CF. Tune in next week as we'll have Orlando Seawolves head coach Tom Traxler on the show. That will conclude this edition of The Hot Seat on Full Sail Live. I'm Josh Taylor. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.